Yeah, what happened was I knew there was a doctor called Stephen Lynn, who for 30 years was on every single Lennon documentary and was featured in every single John Lennon biography and book, saying that he was the guy that helped save John. He held John's heart in his hand. It was all very dramatic.
Yeah.
The problem with Stephen Lynn is he came out and spoke to the press after John was announced dead. For a man who held who held John's heart in his hand, he had an immaculately white sort of coat on. He had no blood whatsoever, which that was the first thing I thought, that's not quite right. I then spoke to the doctor, Dr. Halloran, who actually came out in 2010 and said, actually, no, Stephen Lynn's lying. He didn't hold John's heart in his hand. He didn't help save John Lennon's life. I did. And two nurses that were by his side, Dee Sato and Barbara Camera, both verified Dr. Halloran's statements that they were there working with him. Right. And all three of them agreed that Stephen Lynn did turn up. He was there, but he came in later and didn't actually do anything hands-on to help save John Lennon's life. So Stephen Lynn, in a way, for 30 years has kept the medical evidence covered up by his embellishment.
Did he say the shots were in the back or the front? Or
He said when he came out, he said John had 7 wounds at the time, which put the press into all kinds of a spin because they thought they knew Chapman had a 5-bullet gun. So that wasn't helpful. I think what he meant was, and what we can find out shortly, is he had 4 in and 3 out. So he did have 7 wounds, but it wasn't a very helpful phrase, and it kind of didn't help define what really went on. So anyway, I didn't bother talking to him, but I did talk to another doctor who came out, another surgeon who apparently was there helping out, a guy called Frank Veteran. He's the first doctor I spoke to, who was featured in a Beatles magazine back in the day, saying that John was shot 4 times all down his left side. And I thought, I've not heard that from Stephen Lynn. I've not heard that from Dr. Halloran. Where's this left side thing coming in? So I rang Veteran up and I spoke to him for an hour. And he gave me a very detailed, emotional statement about what he did that night to help save John, and how he thought John was like Jesus and he thought John looked like JFK, and it was all very emotional. And I thanked him for the call, and then I found that on his website, Frank Veteran even had a video where he was speaking about his experiences. What happened with the doctors is, I think 2016, because there was such a merry-go-round of who was doing what, there was some film producers in New York who did a film called The Lennon Report, which is a dramatic film about what really went down in the Roosevelt that night. They got a few things wrong, especially the entry and exit wounds, but they got most things right, giving Halloran and Barbara and Dietra their due recognition for what they did. So I rang up David Halloran next after speaking to Frank Veteran, and I said, David, why wasn't Frank Veteran in the Lennon Report? He just said he wasn't there that night. So we're not going to feature someone who wasn't there. So that put a bit of a chill up my back, but it did make me realise quite early on that because of the fame of John Lennon, people will do anything to insert themselves into history. So that was something. And then I started chatting to Dr. Halloran about the night, and I was expecting him to say what Mark Chapman, the NYPD, the DA's office, and the media at the time all said, that John was shot 4 times in the back. So I just asked him, where on the back exactly was John shot by Mark? And he said he wasn't shot in the back. And I remember when he said those words, I knew, oh no, this is now going to go deeper than I really want it to go. I knew I couldn't stop at that point. It was a massive moment. It was a key moment. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, John was actually shot 4 times in the upper left chest area. And then he said 3 of the bullets that John was shot with came out in a direct line of fire in his upper left back. And 1 of the bullets stayed in John. He thinks that was the one that was closest to John's upper left shoulder. So I asked him to explain these wounds, and he said they were very tight. He called it a professional grouping. And I said to him, you do realise Mark Chapman was standing behind John, and Mark has said that he shot John in the back. And he said, well, that can't be the case. He just thought that was just an anomaly, that he couldn't figure out why Mark would say that, or anybody would think that.
Is that something he thought about himself?
Yeah, it had. And I said to him, have you never thought about... And he just said, well, I just thought it was a detail that just people got. He didn't think it was that important, which I found odd. But remember, this is a guy who stayed in the shadows for 30 years and let Stephen Lynn take all the credit. So maybe he just didn't want to rock the boat. He was a bit uncomfortable with it. So I said to him, look, even if John turned, and we'll talk about the John turning thing in a minute because it's quite important. I said, could he achieve that from where he was? Let's say Mark was 20 feet away, if we're being kind. It's probably more like 25 feet. He said, no, it's impossible. He said, not even a Navy SEAL with a .38 revolver.
It's got to be point blank range.
Yeah, he said he thought the person who did it was probably 2 feet away at best. Point blank range, to get that professional close group